Thanks for being here for the Flow training series with the Colorado Watershed Planning Peer Learning Network. My name is Chelsea Silva, and today's call will focus on building a process designed for your Flows program or project. Today, it looks like we'll have a smallish group, but please, if during any of the presentations you have questions, put those in the chat box. We'll also make space in case you'd rather just ask your question verbally. That's fine. We'll let you come off mic. And at the end, we have a 1-minute survey for you to provide feedback, and we'd welcome any feedback you have for us. I set 4 group agreements for this call today. The first is be present. So I know that we're all coming in virtually, and it's really easy to answer that quick email while you're in this call, but we'd love for you to just sit back and be here. You take this time and set it aside for this call, so please be with us so that you can engage and learn from each other. The second is respect our diversity. We all come to this space from different perspectives and experiences, so please keep those in mind and respect and appreciate those as we're working together and learning from each other. The third group agreement is take space, make space. This means that if you're a big talker, make sure that you're thinking about letting others provide their perspective as well. And if you're on the quieter side, which I tend to be that way, let us hear your voice. We want to hear from you. The fourth group agreement for today is take the lessons and leave the details. This means that especially in small groups, people might be sharing private matters or situations in their workplaces and with their collaborative groups that are sensitive. So please take the lessons that you learn from those, but leave the details so that people can feel like they are able to share authentically. And welcome of those of you who are just joining. As I mentioned, this call is part of our Watershed Planning Peer Learning Network. This is a space for watershed planning leads and people who are working to implement projects out of their watershed plans to connect. We have in-person events. We host a website, and we'd love for you to join if you yourself are working on a watershed plan or other type of planning process in Colorado. And I'll be sure to share the link here in the chat in a minute in case you want to sign up. Oops. I also wanted to highlight that this coming October, the day before the Succeeding Colorado Watersheds Conference, we're hosting our fall workshop. We sometimes host it at the center where they host that conference, but this year we're actually doing it in Edwards, which is really close. So we hope that you can make this workshop. It'll focus on taking plans to projects. So how do you create a plan that actually gets used? And we'll have examples of watershed plans as well as wildfire ready action plans. And we'll have interactive sessions, presentations, as well as a panel. And the part I'm really excited about, I'm obviously excited about the workshop, but is that we're going to be hosting a 10 years of watershed planning celebration. It's been 10 years since the watershed, the Colorado Water Plan came out. And we want to celebrate all of the success stories and work that this body of people, this group of people has accomplished. So please come. It should be really exciting and fun. And I'll put this RSVP in the chat in just a minute. I also wanted to highlight that River Network, with support from the Colorado Water Conservation Board, has a support services program right now where we're offering one-on-one consultations towards planning and implementation, or Octopi support services. So if you're working on a plan and you're navigating some challenging stakeholder issues, or you're trying to figure out where to start when it comes to a stream health assessment, we're here to support you. We've got a team of experts, and all you have to do is fill out a request form. These services are free and first come, first serve, and it's intended as a little help along the way. So we're not going to do a full stream health assessment for you, but we can help you along the way. I wanted to mention that this is our third call today in the Flow training series, and our next call is coming up on October 28th. Tony LaGreca with the Colorado Water Trust will present on flow restoration tools. So we hope you can make that call as well. Finally, before I pass it off to Stacy, I wanted to thank our sponsors today, the CWCB, Western Resource Advocates, St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservation District, the Walton Family Foundation, and Mighty Arrow Family Foundation. This series and also a cohort that we hosted related to flows wouldn't happen without them. So thank you to those sponsors. Okay, briefly, first, we'll hear from Stacy Beaugh with Strategic by Nature. She'll provide a presentation on process design for your flow program or project. And then I'm excited to hear two examples from two folks that actually participated in the flows cohort, Sensa Wolcott with the Mancos Conservation District and Liz Chandler with the White River and Douglas Creek Conservation Districts. And they'll share their experience with process design. At the end, we'll have space for a small group activity, and then we'll wrap it up. So with that, oops, I'm going to pass it to Stacy, and thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. Let me just get my screen share here. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Stacy Beaugh with Strategic by Nature. We are a small facilitation and organizational development focused company. I'm based in Durango, Colorado, and we work a lot with groups that have a focus on natural resources or nature or the environment, and do a lot of work in water supply planning. And that is why I'm here today. I also support the peer learning network that Chelsea described for watershed planning throughout the state of Colorado on the River Network team. So thanks for having me, and I'm excited for this presentation. So the reason why we're talking about process design is because we're trying to think about how we best organize people to have difficult conversations around difficult topics. And if any of you have worked in water supply at all, we know that that is a difficult conversation. There's varying interests. People come from different perspectives. They have different experiences and definitely don't always see eye to eye. So what I'm going to offer today is just a framework for how you can start to think through and prepare for your conversations and have them be implemented effectively. I'm combining a couple different concepts. I, as a facilitator, draw on a lot of different processes and tools in order to be effective in my work. So all of this stuff is really like a dashboard tour, and I encourage you to explore it more or reach out if you have questions, and I can point you in the right direction as the conversation moves forward. So we're going to start with some definitions because you might not know all of these. You might know some of them, and that's great. And then we're going to talk through like what are the key components of a process design. I will offer a brief example of what a process design looks like, and then I'm going to turn it to our guests, Liz and Sensa, to help us round out the examples. And then we will have a small group activity that Chelsea mentioned, where we'll put you in small groups and have you work through your own process design in this scenario that we've created for you. So first, what is a process design? I have worked in facilitation a long time. This is a word I use like 18 times a day, but I understand if you don't work in facilitation that you might not really know what this is. And so essentially it's a workflow. It's the steps that you're going to take to help you through your planning process and making sure that you're addressing all of the goals, all of the needs, all of the barriers that your planning process is going to experience. And you use the process design as a way to kind of plot it out to say, I know we need to talk about this, so it's going to happen on this day. And I know we need this prep materials in order to have that conversation, and here's how we're going to lay that out. So it's really just a way to step through your work in, and also if you do much facilitation, the kind of trick that we always say is that you can't be a good facilitator unless you know the 3 Ps, and those are prepare, prepare, prepare. And this process design helps you prepare for a conversation. You never want to show up to a conversation around a difficult topic without having prepared, and this is the tool that you're going to use to help you. So the next definition is what is mutual gains negotiation. This is a tool that's often used in collaborative conservation spaces to try and bring everybody together to arrive at a common solution. This is a tool I use a lot. I like this framework. If you've ever read the book Getting to Yes, that is it's based around this concept. But essentially, it's an approach that prioritizes relationships and protecting relationships and hearing from everybody and coming up with a co-created solution. So you're basically positioning everybody to get to know each other, understand where everybody's coming from, care where everybody's coming from, and using that knowledge to help you be creative and come up with a solution. It's a lot different than compromising, which is basically saying, well, I will do this if I know that they're not gonna get something too. Like it's very like this is more win-win perspective than it is I'm gonna sacrifice so they're gonna sacrifice. It's being more creative than that so that you can be successful all around. So this is a mutual gains approach, like framework, and you'll get these slides. I'm not going to go through everything, but here's that word, prepare again. But this basically, the key things to look at on this slide are basically that you want to understand why you're coming together. Why is a group even talking in the first place? What is the issue of mutual concern? What's our shared concern among our group? And who are the people that are in the room and what do they care about? Those are like the key pieces of starting off a process. And then you start to create value among the participants. You start to really understand why people are there, why being a part of this process is going to be more valuable to them than going at it alone. And then you start to build the idea of making the pie larger. What are the things that could really help all of us have a win-win instead of some of us just having a good outcome? And then distributing value really comes down to how do we work through those conversations? If we come up with a lot of options, what could our criteria be to make sure that we are meeting everybody's needs in our decision making? And then the key piece here is the follow through, that people are willing to take action on what is decided upon, and they also are willing to keep moving forward with that relationship building. They've seen the value and they want to continue to implement that together. So, the other key aspect of mutual gains negotiation is understanding interests versus positions. And this is a concept we spent a lot of time in the flows cohort because essentially when you are coming together to get more flow in the river, you are automatically coming to the table with a position. You're saying that that's the solution to our problem. And that's a lot of times why these conversations don't succeed because people aren't giving space to think about what the underlying issues are, where everybody's coming from, and trying to figure out if there is something that could be win-win. And maybe getting more flow in the river is part of that win-win, but it probably isn't the only thing, especially when we're talking about how that would happen. So interests are the why. They're needs that you or your colleague must satisfy in order to be there. Like I care about the fish, and if the fish aren't happy, I'm not getting anything out of this process. That is the why. The position is the what or how. So it's the how we're going to get the problem solved. And that is where a lot of us tend to start in these conversations. And that's where we automatically exclude other people. So if I come to the meeting and I say, the fish have to have a pool of water for spawning in this one exact location, that's probably not going to open the room for a lot of negotiation or conversation around the bigger picture. And so this distinction is pretty important in getting to the interests and understanding where people are coming from and what they care about is what's going to set the stage for successful creative conversation. Starting at the positions is going to shut down everybody else and just have people not seeing eye to eye because you're not understanding the underlying reason why somebody is at the table or interested. So the whole goal in the process design I'm going to show you about was really about helping people get to know each other, understand where they are coming from, care about where they were coming from, and then start to talk about what those potential solutions could be because they consider everybody in the potential solution instead of just considering yourself and your perspective. There's some great additional resources on this. I can share, I'll have Chelsea send it out in an email after, but the University of Utah Environmental Dispute Resolution Program has some great videos that really help to illustrate this concept and can also some worksheets that you can work through to help kind of bring that concept into application for you in conversations that you have. So now that we know those things, what's the tool? How do we get a process design created? What is the point of this? So the process design has a couple different factors. One, it has your like rules of operating, like how do we work together? What how like what do we expect of each other, those types of things. The outcomes are what are we trying to achieve so that people can track that. Like how many times have you been to a meeting and you're like, what is the reason I'm here? I do not understand how this fits into the bigger picture. This is to help you and your group stay on track. And then agendas, like what exactly are we going to talk about when so that we can stay on track toward those outcomes and agreements. And these are the same three keys to managing a meeting. If you have done facilitation training, there's also, but I just apply them to the process design because that helps, it makes sense in my brain. So first, as we're diving into a process design, these are like the 6 key areas. One is understanding what is the reason we're coming together? Like what is the issue of mutual concern? What is the thing that we want to collaborate on? It may not totally look the same for everybody because people are already starting to form their positions. If you're saying, well, we're coming together because the health of the river is not great. That's a great issue of shared concern. But if you're saying we're coming together because we want to see XYZ happening with the river, that's a little more specific on positions. So you want to keep digging in and say, what's the root that's bringing everybody here, even if they all have different ideas of how to address the problem. And then the process goals is the next piece. Like, what are we trying to achieve? What is the point of this? How long are we going to have to talk to each other? Like, that's the basis for getting this information outlined. And then talking through barriers, like what are the things that are going to stand in our way on this issue? And identifying interests and positions. And this is an activity that, as a facilitator, I sit down at the beginning of a process and I think about every single person in the group and I write down what I think their interests or positions are. Or if I'm not clear, I know I still have work to do to find those out so that I understand the lay of the room. And then also thinking about, well, if I understand it, that's great. But do the other people in the room understand what everybody else's interests are? And so that is an important step. And then the action steps that can address barriers and help people operate effectively is really the beginning of the process design. How do we plot this out? Like if I know that people need more support in understanding each other's interests, I'm going to build a lot more of those conversations into the front end of our meetings. And then we're not going to actually talk about what projects we want to see on the ground until like maybe meeting 8, because I know that they need to spend some more time understanding where each other's coming from first. And then the last thing is, are there other considerations that can make or break your process? And I'll get into some examples of this next. So the case study I'm going to share is the San Miguel River Partnership. This was a group that came together in 2015 to do a stream management plan, one of the first in the state, and it failed. It did not go well. There were people upset with the process. There was a lot of hard work that went into it and some great information, but it failed in terms of getting the whole community and Watershed bought in to what was happening. And so I came into the picture on try two, along with a lot of other people that really wanted to pick it back up and see it succeed. And this is the process design that we used for that phase, or I should say, version two of that stream management planning process. So the first thing is we sat down and we tried to understand what is the river partnership, what are we trying to do? And we knew that there were, water supply and demand gaps across the watershed. And we needed to talk about that because people were getting impacted in different ways and it wasn't bringing together the community. And we also knew that there's lots of needs on this river. And if they came together to do a plan, it could result in some funding for them. And that was really important. Um, so we talked about barriers. The big ones that came up here are really relationship based, like people didn't trust each other in the watershed or didn't have a good history of working together, or were just frankly burned by the last process that happened. And we needed to think about how to address that. And then data challenges. There was some great data and information that came out of that process, but people didn't trust it and they didn't feel like they had a say or understood what it said. And then the interests were really protecting livelihoods, lots of agriculture. The coal-fired power plant was closing, so really wanted to set communities up for transitioning to a positive future. Value of natural systems, and there's like a long, long list. But essentially, we had a lot of people in the room that maybe didn't get along, but they all really cared about the river. And so that was a good starting point. So behind the scenes, we established a project team and a champion, like who was going to help be the face of this thing in the community. And one of the key, knowing the relationship barriers and that we had some major mistrust from the agricultural community on what was going on with the stream management plan, one of those champions happened to be the agricultural producer that stood up and said that the process did not work the last time. So we were able to get him in a position, instead of being a naysayer, to actually want to do something about it and take the lead on the project. So he helped as a co-lead. And then the other project team members really helped balance out the rest of the participation. And then we, in the green over here, are the outcomes. We identified what a successful process would look like. We would have a solid stakeholder group. We would have all the values and attributes identified. We'd know what the community cared about on this river. We would do a deep dive data evaluation on the needs assessment that had been completed previously. And then we would walk out of the project with goals and objectives and projects that people could take on as a group. And so then we were like, well, how are we going to get along? What decisions will be made and how will we do it? How can we structure the conversation to get the best outcome? And who else needs to be at the table? These were some of the big questions that helped us finish kind of rounding out our process design. So our agreements, and again, I'll share these slides because I'm not going to linger on them long, but the agreements were really, what do we need to do to work together well? One of the big ones that came up was avoiding politics. We were in the middle of COVID during all of this, and so lots of political challenges. And the group never talked about politics once, and it was fabulous. And we were very productive because they made that agreement. And the group made this agreement. The project team did not. The actual stakeholder group made these agreements, which is key. And then the decision making, we made sure to have, we had a rule about, if you said no, you had to come up with an alternative so that we could still have forward progress. And then other considerations that we had in this process design was the agricultural co-chair, like I mentioned. We really were mindful about who we had engaged in the meetings. Like for example, and I'm going to pick on them, but like American Rivers was really involved in our meetings and they have a lot of staff. And if they were going to have 3 people from American Rivers show up at our meeting, we would ask them to just bring one so that American Rivers wasn't, out peopling the other people in the room and we had more balanced participation. Keeping people informed and understanding the culture of the basin was really important to like know how to get information out to people. So this is essentially the numbers at the top are the meetings that we held, and then we identified like the key actions that were going to happen during those meetings so that we could make sure that we were progressing appropriately with and meeting the challenges we already saw with our barriers and understanding that we were meeting our outcomes along the way. So this was kind of the check of like these are all the things we think we're going to do. Do these things actually help us move past barriers or not? And then as we went, if we had to make an adjustment because maybe we needed more time on something or people really didn't understand that data, we had to remember that our goal was to ensure people affirmed the data. So we had to take a step back and spend more time. And I'm going to skip this one because we don't have a lot of time. And then the outcomes from the process were that we were able to finalize the needs assessment. We did have a list of projects and strategies, and we were able to set the stage for the group to follow through with all of the things that they set out to do, which was really exciting. And they were able to take what they learned and the relationships they built to be able to move on to the next phase of their work. So that's all I have. I'm gonna pass it to Sensa, and she's gonna, I don't remember who we said was gonna go first, but I think Sensa, you're on the agenda first. So you're gonna go first and give us your case study on process design, and then we'll have a couple minutes after Liz goes, if anyone has any questions before we go into the small group.
All right, great. Thanks, Stacy. And thanks, Chelsea, for having me here today. I'm going to share my screen for you guys. All right, can you see that?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you guys. As Stacy mentioned, I'm Sensa Wolcott. I'm with the Watershed Coordinator with the Mancos Conservation District. And I was able to participate in the flows cohort that happened over the last year or so with Stacy and Chelsea and all of those sponsors. And so I thought I would share a little bit about how we've used this process design to help design outcomes and goals with the community and really take their input and build that into a piece of our stream management plan process. So just starting with the issue of mutual concern, we sat down, we're in the middle of creating a stream management plan. We're almost through the process, but kind of through this whole thing, we asked stakeholders what would meet the needs of all parties involved. And the answer was always more water. I'm sure that just like your communities, we are dealing with drought and climate change. These things are really impacting the amount of water that we have available in the Mancos watershed. And so we're seeing really low flows. This is impacting a variety of water users, from agricultural users, municipal water. The Ute Mountain Ute tribe is in our watershed at the lower part of our watershed. And so their portion of the stream reach is always very dewatered as well. And then not only just water users, but the environment is also suffering. We're seeing disconnected floodplains, we're seeing degraded riparian ecosystems from these low flows. And so the issue of mutual concern for our question was really, we are seeing really low flows in the watershed, and we're all concerned about the impacts it's having on a variety of different things. Throughout this process, we have a lot of stakeholders involved in our watershed. I'm sure they're all very similar to the stakeholders in your processes and your collaboratives. Our process is headed up by the Mancos Watershed Group, and the Mancos Conservation District is kind of the overseer and convener of this group. But our group is very varied. It includes federal agencies like the Forest Service, Mesa Verde National Park, like I mentioned, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. We do use all of our municipal water comes from one tributary of the Mancos River. And so the town of Mancos and Mancos Rural Water are really involved in this as well. The Mancos Water Conservation District is an important part. I mentioned the environment and then just the community. We don't have a huge recreational aspect in the Mancos. It's not like we have enough water to raft or anything like that. But people do really value the river for the, they like to sit by it. They like their kids to play in it. Their dogs at the dog park go play in the river. And so just involving the community in this process was important as well. So thinking about our process and our outcomes, and like I mentioned, this is just one piece of our stream management plan. I didn't do this for the whole stream management planning process, but this was really the example I used is just for looking at creating flow goals for our community. And so the first piece of that was to do these R2 cross surveys and complete surveys in strategic locations so we could start to use that data to create recommended flows in the Mancos watershed. Um, from there, if you just skip number 3, this purple one for now, from there, we could easily just say, okay, we did the surveys, we have this recommended flow, the data is telling us this. Now we could look and say, what tools will work in the Mancos watershed? But we're kind of missing some pieces when we looked at it that way. And so we really thought to add in this third step, which was looking at an intermediate flow target possibility. So if we're looking at really low flows, how can we look at this and see, like, is the goal that we're setting with the R2 cross surveys actually achievable? Or do we maybe need to set an intermediate flow target to make it feel like we can do something to reach this flow goal instead of just like shooting for the moon, and missing every single time? And so one of the things that this process really helped us do was kind of take a step back and think through it and think, are there steps that we're missing that we should maybe be looking at in between getting these recommended flows and just going straight to the tools and identifying projects, but thinking about, is this really gonna work for our watershed? And then when we really started looking at it and thinking through it, we actually added a whole nother step, which I think was the really important part for our watershed and doing this process design process was not only did we do the surveys, use that data to get the recommended flows from the modeling efforts. We thought about, are these flows achievable, and looked at, historical flows, what our flows looking like in the Mancos watershed. And then instead of just jumping straight to the tools that would work in the Mancos watershed, we really wanted to think about correlating these flows and values to different interests within our watershed. And so we kind of took a step back and started to think about, okay, we want to set these flow goals, and everybody agrees that we need more water in the river, but how much more water do we need in the river? And what does that mean to these different stakeholders? And so we really kind of took a step back and started thinking about, what do certain flows mean for agricultural producers? And thinking about asking agricultural producers, like, what flows do you need in the river to be able to divert water efficiently for your uses? We started thinking about municipal use and how do these goals and recommended flows impact municipal water? Like I mentioned, all of our municipal water comes from one tributary, and so that's a big piece of the pie when looking at these goals. Is like, yeah, R2 Cross is really specifically designed for setting goals for fish, but how do these goals impact these other users, like agricultural producers who are using this to create products and create livelihoods for their families? How does this impact municipal users? And then thinking about, what does this mean for the floodplain in the riparian ecosystem? We're thinking about the in-channel, and we can see that this is the flow we need for the fish, but is this flow going to benefit the riparian ecosystem in general, or do we need to change those goals a little bit more so that we're having a better impact on the environment? And then just really thinking about, if we want community buy-in and we want people to get on board, we need to really show how those flows are going to impact people and impact the community. And so we were able to take a step back and add this additional step here, which I labeled 3B, but to think about, what does this mean to people? What does this mean to our community, to our stakeholders, rather than just thinking, okay, we need 2 CFS in the river at all times because that's the best thing for the river. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything to somebody who likes their dog to play in the river, or somebody who's diverting water for municipal use or things like that. And so we really wanted to take that additional step and think about connecting it back to our why and our stakeholders and our goals of this whole process, which is to, we want to create a plan that is going to have buy-in from our community members to protect and enhance our watershed. And so these goals need to mean something to them. And so we were able to take that additional step and add that into our process, which allowed us to kind of think through, as we're thinking through the format and what steps we need to take to do this. The black ones here, we have, like I mentioned, we were going to do our 2 cross surveys, summarize the data, get a recommended flow, and then just go straight down here to the potential tool inventory and see what could we do to increase flows. That's great, but if none of those tools are understood or important to our stakeholders, then that doesn't do anything for our goals of enhancing our watershed and protecting our water resources. And so by going through this process really deliberately and thinking through these outcomes and these issues of mutual concern, we were able to add these extra steps and think about what are our recommended flows? Can we actually achieve those? And then thinking about stakeholder, I don't know, we called it a stakeholder preference survey for lack of a better term, but thinking about our stakeholders and our water users have a lot of information about water. And so the R2 Cross is just one tool to understand what our water flows look like. But what do our water users know? What do our agricultural producers know? You know, they have things like, if you look at the question mark of snow on the mountains and it's there by July 4th, that means you're going to have a good water year, you know? So they have this like institutional knowledge from working with the land and working with the water for so long that we wanted to utilize some of that information as well. And then, like I mentioned, just adding this additional step of really thinking about what do these flows mean to people in our watershed. So it really helped us be able to think through these additional steps. And instead of just jumping from one step to this bottom one where we have tools that could work, it really allowed us to connect this to the people. And I think that for me and for our watershed group, that was really the key takeaway of this intentional process design was, yes, it did add a little bit of complexity to the process. There were more steps, there were more values to take into account. We couldn't just do the 2-step thing from one to the other, but it really allowed us to help connect this process and the outcomes to the people. And ultimately, if we want to have a successful planning process, we need people to be on board in order to make these behavior changes. And so it was a great exercise to do throughout this flow cohort. It can be complicated and look a little bit complex, but ultimately it really allowed us to connect that back to the people in our watershed. So thank you guys so much. And I think we'll let Liz do her presentation. And then if you have questions at the end of hers, we can do that.
Thanks, Sensa.
Yeah.
Chelsea's going to share.
All right, Liz, you just let me know when you want me to advance slides.
Okay, thanks. All right, I'm Liz Chandler. I'm the watershed coordinator for the White River Integrated Water Initiative. The White River is in western Colorado, kind of northwest Colorado. And I am a contractor to the Conservation District, which ultimately is important because I'm affiliated with them, but I don't work for them. So it gives me a little bit of independence and it allows the community to see the distance so that it is not dominant, the process is not dominated by the Conservation District. Okay. So the incentive for starting a watershed planning process was when the state watershed plan called for stream management planning on the majority of Colorado streams. The area was concerned that people that would come into the Rio Blanco County and not understand the county, how water is used. And so there was a strong desire for local control and guidance over the stream management process. Okay. So what the Conservation District and the county extension agents initially led the process, and they held a series of public meetings throughout the county to see if people were interested in doing watershed planning. And what came out of that there were 2 key uniting factors, which was across all sectors of the society, there was very strong understanding of the importance of the White River to the economy of Rio Blanco County and to people's individual interests. And whether that was fishing clubs, whether that was agriculture, people that just like to enjoy the water. Bird watching is a thing. There's a couple areas that are on the bird migration routes. And so there's a lot of tourism that comes in because of the green zones and the lakes in the area. So that was huge. And there was also a feeling that especially the middle reach of the White River has some unique features that needed local guidance. It needed the local input of people who actually use the river to understand that and guide the planning process. So we formed the Planning Advisory Committee and went across the county and tried to find all of the interest groups that are impacted by the river. And what's perhaps important in this is people didn't get to self-nominate and then become a member of the Planning Advisory Committee. We asked each group to submit 2 names of people that are interested in being on the committee. Then the Conservation District interviewed them and selected the people that wanted to work together. We didn't want to have any flamethrowers. We didn't want to have people that come in that wanted to cause trouble. We wanted people that wanted to work together and understand the interests and needs of the other sectors involved. So, and then along with that, there's actually an amazing knowledge base in Rio Blanco County, but because some of the issues are very specific and require specialized knowledge, we form technical advisors to the group, which are non-voting members of the group, to help guide the technical questions that came up. Next. So I was hired as the facilitator. And I think there's a couple key factors of that maybe were different in our area. But also I think every group has the same sorts of people. There's people that are easy to get along with, and there's some that like to take over a meeting. And so my job was to guide the discussions and not to participate. And I would tell you along with that, it was perhaps understanding if a discussion was going to be very difficult for one group versus another, to maybe have some pre-meeting discussions and help them understand what was on the agenda, mainly to reduce the fear of the discussion. Because it seems like when people are scared and they think their interests are going to be threatened, that is the energy that comes to the meeting. And so to make sure people were heard, and then I also made sure that the whole group know that those discussions had taken place outside, because I was concerned that if they thought there was favoritism, talking to, say, an environmental group or an agriculture group ahead of the meeting, that they would think that I wasn't truly being neutral, that I was trying to guide the discussion and sway people's interest ahead of time. And that was not the goal, not to sway the interest, but to hear what the interests are, what they're concerned about, what they wanted to see advance. Along with that was I made sure that there was never a surprise. Change is hard. And so especially if proposals were going to involve people accepting changes, we wanted to make sure they had a chance to talk about it with their groups ahead of time, so that when we had the meeting, we came with good energy and good information, instead of that anxiety that can take over. Next. So it's important to note that all the groups had equal voting power. Stacy said that so the American Rivers didn't get to have 3 representatives in that. We made sure, especially in Rio Blanco County, that agricultural groups were not overrepresented. The area that we were involved in is the water is heavily used by agriculture, but it's important to know that every group had equal votes. They did have alternatives, and we asked that if they could not be there in person, to make sure their alternative person was there, so that we made sure that we didn't just have one interest group making decisions. We also did the consensus decision making. We didn't have to have 100% unanimous decision, but if you did not like the proposal, you had to say why, but more importantly, what would it take for the decision to be okay with you? And that is what really led to some of the really good discussions, for people to understand what the hangups were, And it also helped people that if they were just kind of a knee-jerk response no, they had to really think it through on why they were a no and present that information and make that compelling case to the group. To ensure everybody participated, a lot of times if it was a new proposal, we would just start the meeting by going around to each person and have them share their group's interests in the proposal. So that way we made sure that all of those ideas were on the table to start the discussion, and we didn't have some new idea come in at the end, that people were fully represented at the beginning. We sometimes had people that were a little more shy. I found out if I went and stood by them, sometimes they thought that just them and me were having a private conversation. And so they would talk a little bit more if they didn't feel like they were addressing the whole group. So I think that helped to move around the room a little bit. Next. So in parallel with the Planning Advisory Committee, we continued the community engagement for 2 years. And there's 4 distinct areas of Rio Blanco County. There's the Upper White River, the towns of Rangeley and Meeker, and then Piance Creek, which has a very different hydrology than the rest of the White River. And so we went to each of those areas to make sure that it was easy for the public to get there. Everybody's busy. And so if they had to travel 20 minutes to get to a meeting instead of an hour or an hour and a half, hopefully that improved attendance. We went twice a year for 2 years. And what we did is we didn't concentrate on the whole area of the White River. What was a concern to the Middle White River? When we were in Piance Creek, we talked about what was important to them and what their challenges are. The same with the Upper White River. And that was interesting because each area has different pressures. And I think that that was important for people to stay engaged, to feel like their particular needs were being heard. And then key to that was everything came back to the Planning Advisory Committee. There was no editing involved, which sometimes upset the PAC quite a bit because they thought decisions were made. And so when some area had a different interest, there was a little bit of bristling that occurred because they felt like that they had put in all this work and how dare somebody come in and ask for a change. And so I think that was one of the biggest challenges of the process was to bring the public comments into the Planning Advisory Committee and have them be receptive to new ideas when people hadn't been at the meetings. Next. So I think our key successes is a wide coalition of the community supports the process, but is even aware that the process is going on. It's not a group of 10 or 15 people that know this is going on. We've had good luck with community engagement. Anything that we have, any reports or anything that have done, we've always held public meetings so that they get the first preview before anybody else does. So if there's editing or things that need to happen to the process, we make that available to the public. I think key to this was exactly what Stacy said, is there was early involvement. We didn't come and say, okay, this is the concern that's been addressed and this is what we want to do. We said, what are your interests? How would you like to see that addressed? What are you worried about if it's addressed in this way? You know, what are your concerns? So it wasn't just what do you want, it's what are you afraid of? And so the fun thing that is happening is we've had some ditches self-nominate for big infrastructure improvement projects. And along with that, the owners where those ditches sit, the owners of that land, are also coming to the table with us and are very interested in these win-win projects or mutual gains to where the river benefits from the infrastructure improvement as well as the ditch. So it's not just an isolated project that benefits the agricultural use. It's going to benefit the landowner. So when they look out the window, it looks prettier. It looks the way they want the river to look. And it's going to benefit the fish passage and maybe long run temperatures of the river. That's kind of depends how the designs come out. And that is all I have for you.
Thank you so much, Liz. All right, well, let's can spend a couple minutes on some questions and then we're going to dive into our activity where you can experience taking all these ideas of how to engage people and put them into a process design based on what your goals are for your process. So any questions for Liz or Sensa?
We got a question in the chat, Stacy.
Great. Sorry, I don't have that up. I'll get it. With the expectation to have hybrid meetings, what are your thoughts? Rather meet in person because it seems like I'd rather meet in person because it seems like there's more thoughtful engagement. Sense, I'll let you take a stab at that first and then we'll let Liz go for it.
Yeah, it's always a balance, isn't it? I feel like providing hybrid meetings is helpful for people who are not able to make it, but it is hard to have the same level of engagement during a hybrid meeting versus meeting in person. So I think it's important to maybe provide both. You know, some can be hybrid, but trying really hard to get people in the room can be really important for the processes, from my experience at least.
Liz, you're on mute. Oh, Liz is muted. I will offer while she's unmuting.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay,
Go for it.
sorry about that. I would say with a hybrid meeting, the organizer of the meeting has to be really, really careful about the room and making sure that then the people that are online can hear people talking in the room. I've been involved in a couple that you're online and you're really excluded from half of the conversations. And so I think if you're going to do hybrid, you have to be very thoughtful about your venue. And I actually have come to the opinion that either in person or online is easier. Hybrid to me is really tough to engage everybody.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if you have an opportunity to equalize everybody's participation by all being in person or all being online, that's really helpful. But I think if you do have a good venue, like we just did a process where we had in person and hybrid, and it worked out really great. We also had a kind of a ground rule that if you couldn't show up from your organization, you were allowed to send somebody in your place. And so that made it a little more flexible for people. But it all depends on what your goals are for your process and what you're trying to achieve and matching your meeting formats to that. Okay, so next question, Liz, this is for you. You said you excluded flamethrowers from the stakeholder group. How did the public react to that, and did they see it as favoritism?
I don't think because we did not exclude the group. There was a group involved that has some people with very strong opinions, and the person from that group who represented them also has strong opinions, but was also able to listen and appreciate other people's ideas. So I don't think they saw it as favoritism. And I would like to think that over time, when they saw the engagement and things coming together, that the group as a whole appreciated that decision because it allowed it to be more productive. I don't know how the flamethrower thought. I'm sure their feelings are still hurt. But maybe it was an opportunity for personal growth because I think they were told why they were not selected. And so, but I think for the benefit of the group, it's a decision that was important to bring people to the table that wanted to collaborate.
Great, thank you. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, we are going to dive into our next activity. And what we're going to do is Chelsea's going to put a link in the chat to this worksheet, and we're going to have you get in a small group and work together to answer the questions. And essentially, there's a scenario there. And it explains who you are, what you're doing, what your task is. And then there's some questions about that would help you complete a process design. What is the issue of mutual concern? What are the outcomes, barriers? And we're not expecting you to get through all of these questions, but we want you to be able to take this worksheet and use it as a tool in your next process design process planning. That's a lot of word process, sorry. So, if you can really focus on number 1 and 2 in the conversation, that would be really helpful for you. And this is an opportunity for you to apply all the things that you've learned today. And like you heard, there are a lot of different ideas for how to get people's engagement and how to structure conversations, but what's the best way based on the goals and outcomes of the process that you have to work through that? So I have us in groups, and I'm going to let you go off. And I'm just going to recreate the groups real quick because a couple people need to leave. And we have Liz is in one group and Sensa's in the other, and Chelsea and I will be floating around if you have questions. And I hope you enjoy this activity. So we'll bring you back in about 30 minutes. And don't forget to introduce yourselves. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're not going to have time to go into the reflections, but I did hear some really great conversations in each of the groups, and I'd be curious. Chelsea put the link in the chat for the evaluation, but if you have any key takeaways on the breakout or something that you just really enjoyed talking through or was like a big aha for you, if you want to put that in the chat too so other people could see, that would be helpful. So while Chelsea is wrapping us up, you can start typing things in the chat. So Chelsea, I'll send it to you.
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today, and we hope you'll make it to the October 28th call and our fall workshop. We'll send out all these resources today or tomorrow, so you'll get a hold of those slides and all the links. And with that, yeah, if you have a minute to fill out that evaluation, we really appreciate it. Otherwise, I think we've got 3 minutes if anybody wants to share their reflections.
Or maybe Liz or Sensa, if there's anything you heard the group talking about that just really resonated given your presentation, that would be great to hear.
I would tag on Sensa's correlating flows to values. I think that's really important because that helps the community identify what values are the most important to them and what flows is it going to take to sustain them. And I think that maybe makes finding the water to sustain that flow easier if you understand what it's going for. So I think that was a really good point she brought up.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Liz. Something that was really kind of stand out in our conversations too was just like using understandable language and making sure everybody is kind of on the same playing field is not always easy in these processes, and ensuring, if you're trying to bring stakeholders and people in, ag producers and ecologists and recreationalists and everybody don't always use all the same words and don't always understand the same topics. And an ag producer may understand, riparian health in a very different term than an ecologist, but they get the same, like they understand the same thing. It's just called something differently. And so just like making sure that we're like really working on that understandable, inclusive language for our processes was something that we kind of talked about a lot.
Great.
Yeah, and I can add to that. I mean, even just in our small group of people that are familiar-ish with this work, right? We had discussions around language. And so I I feel like when you get into stakeholder groups like this, and Stacy, you could probably comment too, you get a lot of like, we gotta like really start at like definitions. It's like, well, yeah, like I don't know. There's so much hesitation in like really starting from the basics, but it's so helpful when you actually have those basics for the rest of it. So it's kind of like that steroid investment up front to make the rest of it like run smooth. And people very often underestimate the power of all of these, very simple but power like important conversations. So yeah.
Great. Well, Stephanie, thank you. All right, well, we're wrapping it up. Let you all go to your next thing. We appreciate you sticking with us for the whole meeting and participating in the activity. And we hope that the tools are useful for you and look forward to hearing how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Stacy.
you. Bye.
Bye.